I'm Jim Ellison, here for the ASHRAE Historical Committee. On the occasion of the ASRE Centennial, we're interviewing Clint Phillips, former president of ASHRAE in 1982-83, and who started with ASRE in 1944, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about how you got started with ASRE?
Yes. Normally these interviews usually start with the background of what did you do when you're 2 years old, what did you do when you... We're going to kind of move past that point. To be quite honest, I was not attracted to the refrigeration industry at all. I had a couple of jobs that were fairly good for a young person that dealt in or out with refrigeration or service or installation of that sort of thing. And on the advice of a friend, I applied for and got a job as a lab mechanic at the National Bureau of Standards. And I was hired, and I'm glad that I was, in 1942. My first assignment dealt with refrigeration, but not in a way that I would have expected. The Bureau was involved with a lot of military work, which satisfied part of my reason for wanting to join, because in the jobs that I was having, I didn't feel like I was really making much of a contribution to the war effort. I thought in this capacity I could do so. Was to reassemble an old ammonia compressor system to provide low temperature in test chambers for testing of military equipment. Put the plant together, checked it out. I was quite new to that type of machinery, but I worked with a crew who operated it, and it worked quite well. However, there was an accident, possibly due to the age of some of the resurrected equipment, that released a lot of liquid ammonia, and I happened to be where the break was. And I came out okay, with one exception: I lost the sight in one eye. So that if I had not been attracted to refrigeration before, I was now very much attracted to refrigeration, but in a totally different sense. I felt that that shouldn't happen. And as a consequence, I stayed with the activity, one kind or another, in what was then the relatively new air conditioning, refrigeration, and heating research section of the Bureau of Standards, where I made a career for about 40 years. The opportunities were tremendous. First of all, the Bureau of Standards and what is now ASHRAE share a direct interest in many of the things that each group does: standards, testing, instrumentation, measurement, and I enjoyed this work. The advantages went far beyond that. In 1944, I joined ASRE, and that opened a marvelous door for me. I joined, quite honestly, to learn. They had test programs, and they had school programs, and all kinds of things, which were excellent. That trend has continued now since the merger in ASHRAE. And to a person who wants to apply himself, there is no limit to what he can draw in benefits of personal training and knowledge, but you have to work at it. You've got to get yourself involved in the activities, work on them diligently, listen when it's appropriate, share when it's appropriate, and you will continue to grow. And that's still true today. I also joined RSES, Refrigeration Service Engineers Society. Their total function is education of people who install and operate refrigeration equipment. I also joined the programs that existed at the time for training in some of the local schools. They had work-related courses, some encouraged by your employer, others you could take on your own. But you were always encouraged to do it. And as time went along, in 1943, was really the beginning of my career in refrigeration, and heating, and air conditioning. There was an association at that time in 1943-44 called the International District Heating and Cooling Association. Their main interest was to sponsor large-scale heating of buildings from a central source. And I became interested in that group, and I'm a life member of that group as of today. In 1951, I shared in the formation of what was called the Refrigeration Trade Association. In RSES, we became aware, as the war came to a close, that the existing situation in most cities was that refrigeration people and air conditioning people were considered relatively new and unique trades in the permit and the inspection departments of most city governments. And they sort of looked the other way when you did some wiring, when you did some minor plumbing associated with refrigeration or air conditioning. However, the plumbers who had their own license and the electricians who had their own license began to say to the inspectors, we've got these people in here working on wiring, working on plumbing, and they're not licensed. Shut them down. We tried to get RSES to back a program to get licensing, which would give refrigeration people their limited field of authority to work on their systems, not taking away basic plumbing, not taking away at all from the basic electrical trades. RSES said no, their main function was education, and their charter wouldn't let them get involved with that kind of activity. So as a spin-off, in 1951, we formed a group called the Refrigeration Trade Association with the avowed purpose of getting appropriate licensing for refrigeration and air conditioning mechanics and contractors. In a few years, we were relatively successful in starting what is now almost universal. We got licensing for refrigeration people in the District of Columbia, in Baltimore, in Richmond, in North Carolina, and then it kind of took off on its own at that point. So we drew that operation to a close in about 1956 or 57. In 1951, thanks to the advantages of education and the ability to use work-related experience plus applied education, I qualified for a professional engineering license. And a year or two later qualified for the equivalent mechanical engineering status in my work organization. And that really opened up a lot of doors, because in the years that followed after that, it led to international activity on standards, on cooperation with industry in setting methods of test for various refrigeration, which frequently would find its way into ASHRAE standards for how to do this, how to measure this, how to test this, and so on. Had the opportunity to share in building the first secondary refrigerant compressor calorimeter at the Bureau, and the first calorimeter for testing packaged heat pumps and packaged air conditioners, which are now widely used. Every manufacturer certainly has them. And they now are pretty well standardized through descriptive literature that comes out of ASHRAE again, in various standards. In 1971, because I had gotten active in the National Capital chapter of ASR. By the way, the equivalent chapter during the ASRE years was a joint Baltimore-Washington chapter. As of the merger, the National Capital chapter got its own charter, and in 1971, I was the president of the local chapter. And found that an interesting experience, because it taught me that if you don't work at it, it won't go very far. It's not, pretty much nothing in ASHRAE is just totally honorary. If you get somewhere at ASHRAE, you probably worked for it, and that's good. In 1982, I became president of ASHRAE. And at that time, it was considered a possible conflict of interest between government employment and a president of an engineering society. So I resigned from the Bureau standards in 1982 to become president of ASHRAE. And then, addressed all the things that every president addresses, the issues of the time, the internal concerns for mutual support between different factions of the group and so on, which are very challenging and very rewarding when they work out. And when the presidential year is over, it sort of continues for a while because of follow-on assignments in the various committees of one kind or another. And then you begin to come back to your fundamental basic interest, which might be administrative, and there certainly is ample opportunity for that in ASHRAE, or it might be technical, and certainly there's more than ample opportunity to get into the technical activities through the technical committees. I had gotten quite interested at that time in, and was instrumental in getting a technical committee started on district heating, which has continued to function to this day and has now adopted change of title to district energy, because, and I'll get back to this, one of the issues at the time I was president was the emerging energy concern. We no longer could be reckless with energy, and ASHRAE had the opportunity to influence energy use in a multiple number of ways: building, construction, installation, services, all kinds of things, one of which are systems like group district heating systems. However, maximum energy conservation in a district heating system is really accomplished when it contains cogeneration, which also had been addressed in a TC in ASHRAE. When you combine cogeneration with the district heating systems, you make them district heating and cooling systems along with power generation. And you burn the fuel once and not twice. I mean, that's an ideal explanation. Obviously, there are some trade-offs. But I became quite interested in that, and with several people from ASHRAE and from industry, formed what we call the North American District Heating and Cooling Institute, which actively lobbied, and because ASHRAE can't do that, actually lobbied for support of energy conservation systems, not just district heating and cooling, but building conservation systems. And a lot of things came out of the Congress that relate to that in their various attempts to start controlling energy utilization. That work continued for 6 or 8 years, and then we merged North American District Heating and Cooling Institute with what was then the International District Energy Association, which had recognized the same change and still pushes that technology today. And I became director standards for that combined group, and was instrumental in getting their consideration on standards for methods of measurement and various things in that organization, which are related back to the previous experience with the importance of accuracy and measurement that came out of working a number of years with NBS. Now, moving to another area, what were the issues in 82, 83 that really were calling for attention that would affect not only ASHRAE, but the industry and the country as a whole? What are we going to do about energy? Certainly at that time, ASHRAE's commitment to Standard 90 was being started. It wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. So we had many issues to be resolved. We did it through a series of public hearings, public reviews of the standards, and as the need for energy conservation has continued to push, and we've added more factions to the Standard 90 series, those needs for resolution between affected industries and the consumer still call for major attention on the part of ASHRAE, and it's a good effort. Also at that time was the beginning talk that the freons might be in trouble, CFCs. I can recall a session, and a representative from one of the committees came to the board, wanted ASHRAE to issue a policy saying, and this is my breath, I'm paraphrasing pretty carelessly, these dumb scientists don't know what they're talking about. Do you realize that if we can't use Freon, people around the world will starve because they can't have refrigeration, and so on and so on and so on? Well, thank goodness we recognized at that time that fundamentally ASHRAE was an engineering technical society, not a preaching society. And so we cleaned up the language a little bit and issued a policy that we remain yet to be convinced of the need for some of these pending regulations, but we'll study them carefully, and as they are necessary, we believe the industry can meet any challenge that comes forth. And as the years have gone by since then, we certainly have. We have new refrigerants that in some respects protect the environment, work just as well as better as some of the ones that we said could not be improved on. And we learned a valuable lesson. If you do your homework and you study, you can resolve serious problems. So that was an issue then. Also at that time was the realization that ASHRAE was growing in size, both nationally and internationally, and we still had limited communication capability. For example, other than in the United States, frequently news of actions, the journal, so would arrive 30 days later after some action was taken. So we realized then that we had to get more deeply involved in improved communication capabilities. And to some extent, that has continued to today until we now have embraced the internet, which supports us in our growth and our activities far beyond our expectations. Now people have the issue tomorrow morning of something in any of our affiliate associations that we have right here in this country. And that is a rather remarkable circumstance if you're going to serve your membership equally around the world. And we certainly try to do that. I think that some of the issues that I think the question was raised, what events have changed ASHRAE, or what events have changed the industry? Well, certainly a whole host of things have had that kind of an effect. For example, my theme of my presidential year in ASHRAE was effectiveness of ASHRAE. I had observed that the different elements of our industry, those that really do the basic research and develop new products, is unquestionably a valuable contribution of ASHRAE. And we tended to sort of take for granted that the people who buy, sell, service, install, maintain are just automatically going to do a great job. And we contributed to their training sessions and so on. I had the feeling, and these are my numbers, not any great accuracy, that about 15% of our members really do the basic refrigeration research design, the products of which the whole world uses. And there is no question that that's a valuable asset. But at the same time, again, these are my numbers, not official ASHRAE numbers, but about 85% of our members are in the other group. We buy the products of the industry, we install them, we sell them, we bring it to the public. Those two have to be considered equally important to the success of our industry. And that brought about a lot of the things we see today in ASHRAE, the training courses for design of field systems, the heat load calculations so that you can select the machinery, the standards that tell you the capacity of systems are, what the effectiveness of filters are, the sorts of things that a person who's going to try to put together such a system for the public has reliable numbers and reliable figures to work with, so that his systems work out right. And we are now beginning to recognize that these two must support each other. And I think we are approaching that point. We're getting there now, and I think that's good. I think that so many things that have really happened that made an impact on both on ASHRAE and on the industry. Certainly, the start of the code language standards, which began with Standard 90, shook everybody up. And people are still wondering, should we be doing that? No. I've always sort of secretly felt that if ASHRAE worked real hard and produced a standard of some kind, and it went out with all of its public reviews and everything, and then there was unhappiness among certain elements, that it either meant that it was a terrible standard, or perhaps it meant it was a very good standard, and that it accomplished something useful, but somebody didn't like it. And we deal with those issues every day, and we try to look at both sides of that picture. We certainly, I'm not going to just write, if we can avoid it, an idealistic standard that says, this will save the world, but it put everybody in the business out of business. That's no good. And we struggle with that balance all the time. And I think, and it's difficult, we try to maintain that balance as best we can. We certainly are still struggling with looking for new and more specialized refrigerants that have the broadest range of desirable characteristics, the ability to lubricate, the minimum damage from moisture, the things that really don't have much to do with the refrigerating effect. And there are lots of compounds that are excellent, but they eat up the metal in the compressor, or they'd have turn all the oil to acid or something else. Well, those have to be carefully worked out by people qualified to do that. And those people are in the industry, and they share their products. And ASHRAE tries to come up with ways to say, how can the public in general be sure that these are doing what they're supposed to? Those two factions need to work together. And then one of the things that kind of created a stir for a while, again, it related to standards. If there was some element in a standard that some single faction in industry felt was causing them an unusual burden, we established a series of actually public hearings where we would try to put together an impartial review panel consisting of representatives from the people that were affected, the general public, somebody from ASHRAE, and so on. And in many cases, we were able to resolve, or at least come up with a reasonable compromise that would make it a workable situation. I think that was a change in the industry. It certainly was a change in ASHRAE. We issued a policy statement several years ago, which I think represented a major change in ASHRAE, and that was that we no longer hinted that health might be related to ASHRAE standards, that health was a legitimate part of ASHRAE's concern, and we embraced membership from the medical related professions to make sure that if we did say something as it related to health, not just comfort, but health, that it was on sound footing. And that was certainly a major change in ASHRAE philosophy.
Can you tell us about your early years in ASRE and something about the refrigeration industry at that time?
Yes. I think that there isn't any question but what the early membership in ASRE came pretty solidly from the ice manufacturing industry, which was big business in those days. Food storage, that is large industrial food storage systems, large, usually ammonia systems. And in the food preparation industry, large-scale freezing of foods and that sort of thing. And that's still a staple today. However, we've done it with different forms of machinery and different sizes. In those days, the plants were big, and the people in ASRE, their concern was that it would kind of get lost in this new fascination for air conditioning if they merged with ASHRAE. And they certainly continued to play an important part in the total picture, but the applications of refrigeration now are much more diverse and cover a range of sizes in addition to large plants, which are still in the purview of ASHRAE. It did represent a change on their part when they merged in 1959. And we certainly want to keep that element very much alive and have various programs such as the Milton Garland Refrigeration Award for the chapters that address the question of basic refrigeration. And that's getting new and stronger attention, and that's good. I think that's the fundamental difference in the technical side of the two groups as they came together. And they merged fairly well in the ability to use the technology for measurement, the technology for standard designs that can be implemented on a broad scale. And certainly we have to recognize without any question that very large refrigerating plants make it possible for very large air conditioning systems. And certainly in the field of something like district heating, extremely large refrigerating plants are necessary to accomplish the goal. So it's very much a part of our technology today. And I think maybe that kind of brings us to the point where we'd say, what, somebody asked the question, somebody asked you today, what should a young person who plans to enter the HVAC field, what should he do? Well, there's a lot of discussion about this, but I think that we have to recognize that to move effectively into the HVAC field today, certainly at the engineering levels, requires a college degree. Absolutely. You can come in the other route, but it's very difficult today. Because the degree is used to sort of say, this person is qualified to be trained in our profession. And that's a pretty strong starting point. However, the student, whether is he deeply involved in graduate studies, doesn't change this, should actively get involved in an ASHRAE student chapter. If there isn't one, bring about some action to get one in your school, and then work at it, really work at it, and at the earliest possible moment, get into membership of ASHRAE. Once you get into membership of ASHRAE, get yourself on relative technical committees that appeal to you, and work at it. It will pay dividends, and you will be stronger candidate for better positions in the HVAC industry. I don't think I can make any recommendation stronger than that. But certainly get involved and work at it. Nobody's going to hand you anything on a platter anymore. Work at it. For every activity that you participate in and make a contribution, there will be benefits that will come back that you hadn't even thought of. Somebody will call you one day and say, I met you at a TC meeting. Could your company help me with this? You have no way of knowing where will the contacts come that are beneficial to your livelihood than becoming active. ASHRAE isn't a business promotion organization. It provides the mechanism for the contacts that produce a strong industrial environment. You don't share in it if you're not in it, if you're not active. I don't think I can make any stronger recommendation than that. And then I think that we certainly have sort of skimmed up and down over various aspects. Your personal involvement in ASHRAE will pay dividends, both in your feeling of self-confidence in the industry, your feeling of usefulness to the industry. So get involved, stay involved.
Good advice.
Appreciate the chance to kind of share these thoughts with you.
Thank you.